Can everyone hear me? Hi, welcome everyone to your first afternoon panel. I'll encourage you all to move in, fill in these tables over here so you can see us and we can see you. A little bit? Okay. All right, while you're moving, I'll introduce myself. My name's Jessica Robertson. I'm the Director of Policy and Business Development at New Leaf Energy, which is a solar and storage developer based in Massachusetts, but active throughout New England and around the country. And I'm joined here by a whole selection of presenters that are going to be talking about different things that are going on in New Hampshire these days and what's coming next. So without further ado, we'll start with Jeannie Oliver. She is the VP of Resident-Owned Communities of New Hampshire and Energy Solutions at the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, and she'll be talking about the new Solar for All program. Go for it.
All right. Can everyone hear me okay? Ooh. Yeah. Okay, so I am Jeannie Oliver. I am the Vice President of ROC New Hampshire. Who has heard of the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund? Just some hands. All right, I probably don't need to go too in-depth into who we are, but I'll give a little bit of an overview. Today I'm going to be talking about community solar projects in resident-owned communities, which are resident-owned manufactured housing parks in New Hampshire, and ROC New Hampshire is a program of the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. Oops. These slides are not progressing. I tried the clicker. All right, let's try that again. So the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund is a community development financial institution, which is essentially a non-profit lender. And we have over 40 years of experience in this space. We started in 1983, and we started with a resident-owned community. There was a mobile home park or a manufactured housing park called Meredith Center, had 13 households, and it was going to be closed. We had an investment from the New Hampshire Sisters of Mercy, which helped us to organize the residents in that manufactured housing park to purchase their park and run it as a resident-owned community. And that's where our community development financial institution started. We still do resident-owned communities, but we're broader than that. We also do lending to small businesses, agricultural businesses and farms, daycare, that sort of thing. We're a mission-based lender, and we also provide technical assistance. And technical assistance is a requirement of community development financial institutions, and as you'll hear in the energy space, it's a really, really important part of the work that we do. So as I said before, resident-owned communities, so resident-owned manufactured housing parks, are the biggest program of the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. We have 151 resident-owned communities in New Hampshire. So 151 of about 450 mobile home parks in New Hampshire are owned by the residents themselves. Our program works with the residents to acquire the funding to purchase the park, to organize as a cooperative, and then we provide them with training and business and governance coaching to help them manage their parks successfully. The overall goal when we're working with resident-owned communities is to secure permanent affordable housing. So resident-owned communities, manufactured housing parks owned by residents, is the most affordable avenue of home ownership in New Hampshire. And so it's affordable housing, but also working with residents to really ensure that their communities are resilient, both in terms of financial resilience and environmental resilience. This movement started in New Hampshire, and then it expanded nationally. So there's an organization called ROC USA. We have some representatives here, I believe. There are now 334 ROCs nationally, so it's a big program. The resident-owned communities in New Hampshire have been leading the way with renewable energy. So starting in 2016, 2017, We worked very closely with the New Hampshire Legislature, with the Public Utilities Commission, and now the Department of Energy in New Hampshire on their low-income community solar initiatives. So I like to say that ROC Community Solar is where affordable housing meets climate justice. Low-income residents, as you all know, have some of the highest energy burdens in the United States. Energy burden, high energy burden, I think is defined as where a household is spending 6% or more of their income on energy costs. There was a study put out by the Berkeley Labs recently looking at community solar and energy efficiency in manufactured housing parks in Michigan, and they estimated that nationally 40% of residents in manufactured housing parks or manufactured homes suffer from high energy burden. And so we are using community solar as a way to help address that energy burden. About 5 to 10 years ago, the conversation in this space was really centered around barriers to low-income solar, and commonly you'd hear barriers talked about in terms of financial barriers, siting barriers, and informational barriers. We've found that working with resident-owned communities has really helped us to address these barriers with the help from several New Hampshire programs. So group net metering, absolutely crucial to low-income community solar in New Hampshire. We can't do these projects without group net metering. The New Hampshire Renewable Energy Fund, which sets aside a percentage of the Renewable Energy Fund to provide grants for low, moderate income community solar projects, absolutely critical to the success of these projects. And also, New Hampshire has the low, moderate income community solar projects provisions in the net metering rules. It gives an extra 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour for low, moderate income community solar projects, also critically important to the success of these projects. So when I talk about ROC community solar projects, I like to say that it takes a true community to make these work. Their success depends on support within the resident-owned community. Of course, we need to have enthusiasm to embrace the technologies and the opportunity, but also working with the New Hampshire Department of Energy. They've been amazing in the sense that we know the programs are not perfect, and they've worked with us year over year to help refine the program as we go. It also takes a lot of partnerships. So we've been working with the Vermont Law and Graduate School Energy Clinic to provide pro bono legal services for these projects. It's really important that the communities we work with make informed decisions and that there's an element of consumer protection that's brought into the mix, and the Vermont Law and Graduate School Energy Clinic has been providing that service. Contractors, solar installers. This has been a learning experience. Our first project went in 2018. We'd never done this before. No one had done this before in the country. It wasn't fast, so working with really patient solar contractors who are willing to learn with us and also to work with the grant process, which is on a reimbursement basis, so it's typically not on your normal commercial terms where you have a deposit and then milestone payments. It takes special relationships to make that work. So let's go. ROC community solar projects, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a description of how we've structured them. We have both community-owned projects and we have power purchase agreement arrangements, so where the project is owned by an investor. There are pros and cons to both. So far, all of our projects, bar one, have been fully grant funded, and those ones are all owned by the community. The benefit of this is that all of the financial and environmental benefits flow directly to the low moderate income households in resident-owned communities. The downside is that we're leaving the investment tax credit on the table, or we have been. This is like a big question mark right now that we're having legal advice developed on. ROCs, resident-owned communities, they don't really have an income appetite, which is why we're leaving the investment tax credit on the table. They're not profit generating. they're also not non-profits. So the new elective pay, or direct pay as you might know it by, doesn't apply to them, we think. There may be some loopholes that we're now looking at, but at this stage it looks like they can't leverage the investment tax credit. We have one project, the very first project we did that was not fully grant funded, that is investor owned, so it has a power purchase agreement. And there are some benefits to this, although all of the financial and environmental benefits don't necessarily stay within the community. It means that we're able to leverage outside financing when there isn't grant opportunities. Right now we're in a period of time where there's grants, but we're not always going to be in this space where there's grant money coming. So it's really important for us to develop this model with them. There's going to be projects where communities don't have the land available for their very own community solar project, so it'll be an off-site project. In those cases, we'll need to investigate power purchase agreement arrangements as well. And also, of course, the benefit is that we're able to leverage the investment tax credit by structuring them that way. And so for anyone, I'm assuming everyone here is familiar with net metering and group net metering. This isn't always the case when I'm presenting on ROC community solar projects. So this slide is just a visual illustration of the arrangement between all of the entities that are involved in these projects. In our case, everyone has to have a group net metering agreement when you're doing group net metering. Ours is just a special group net metering agreement where it's really almost like a participation agreement, and it sets out the rights and obligations of each household in that resident-owned community to participate in the solar array. All of our projects are opt-in, and the reason that they're opt-in and not opt-out is because to engage in group net metering, and especially to engage with the low-income community solar program, you have to provide information to the utility and to the regulators. So your customer account information, we can't force people to provide us that information. Opt-in. Annual income surveys, the bane of my existence. You can't make people do those, so it's opt-in. And so just a slide on where we've been and where we're going. Since 2018, we've completed 3 ROC community solar projects. It doesn't sound like much, right? But keep in mind, this was really new in 2018. We've learned a lot in completing those 3 community solar projects. And I think that we're now ready to scale. We have 4 more projects in progress. These have all been fully grant funded. Some of them are in the permitting stage. Some of them are still in the contracting stage. Some of them are ready to be installed. And then the most exciting part, we have $11 million coming to the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund as part of New Hampshire's Solar for All Award. And I'll talk a little bit more about the Solar for All Award on the next slide. But under that program, we're going to be required to do 15 ROC community solar projects over a 5-year performance period. I'm a little bit nervous. We've done 3, remember, since 2018, and now we're going to be doing 15 in 5 years. But again, I think the lessons that we've learned and the legal agreements, like the templates that we've developed and the model that has now become not quite cookie cutter, because every community is special, but more cookie cutter than before, I think it might just be possible. Well, it has to be possible, right? Otherwise the EPA is going to be coming after me. And then this last figure on the bottom right is the average utility bill saving that each of these communities is currently realizing. It ranges because, of course, it depends on the site, depends how many people are in the community and the size of the project. But currently it ranges from $28 to $55 a month on average, which may not sound like a lot to us sitting in this room, but when you're low, moderate income, that can make the difference between, say, putting Christmas presents under the tree this year. So we've found that it has been meaningful for our residents. I'm assuming everyone is very familiar with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. So there's, as you know, 3 programs under the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Solar for All, which is the program I just talked about, where the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund is going to be awarded $11 million. New Hampshire in total was awarded $43 million, $43.5 million for that program. We have the National Clean Investment Fund, and we have the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator. I'm getting better at my acronyms. I'm trying not to use acronyms at all. Those are loan products that are intended to help accelerate the clean energy movement, particularly in underserved communities. The New Hampshire Community Loan Fund is going to be participating in all 3 of these programs. For the ROC programs, resident-owned communities, it's primarily going to be under Solar for All. And the reason for that is there's very, very low appetite for additional debt in these communities, and the other 2 programs are debt products. However, we do have a solar lending program within our business and communities team. So our team at the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund that works with small businesses, nonprofits, municipalities, agricultural farm businesses. They will be using and I'm going to use the acronyms for time, NCIF and CCIA programs to enhance their solar lending and other renewable energy lending products. So Solar for All specifically, I was told that there may be some burning questions here today, so I thought I'd include some general information. I can only really speak to ROC New Hampshire's portion of it, but I've just summarized up here how the money is going to flow. So $43.5 million to New Hampshire, that's coming in through the New Hampshire Department of Energy. There are 3 programs that are being funded by Solar for All in New Hampshire. New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority will be using just over $23 million for solar and workforce housing. As I said before, we have just over $11 million for ROC community solar projects. And then the New Hampshire Department of Energy is going to be using the balance to supplement their existing low, moderate income community solar program. So all of it is community solar. That's a point worth noting. And I'm sorry that the formatting is messed up on this on the timeline below. But essentially where we are right now is we're in the negotiation phase with the Environmental Protection Agency. Starting in 2025, we transition into a planning phase. So under Solar for All, recipients were allowed to, but not required to have a 1-year planning phase. And during this phase, we're hoping we're going to work out all the kinks and solve all of the mysteries of federal funding. This is the big challenge for us. We've done all of our projects under state funding so far. We've gotten used to that model. Federal funding comes with different strings, and we have to learn how to work with those strings. So Davis-Bacon wages, Build America, Buy America. I always get that mixed up if it's Buy America, Build America, or Build America, Buy America. But reporting and compliance, those sorts of things. We have a really steep learning curve. How we do income qualification verification in our communities. And then starting in 2026, we'll be transitioning into that implementation phase. So my last slide is just some concluding thoughts. So we think that the ROC model lends itself to leveraging solar opportunities for low, moderate income households. It's proven itself to be a solution of many solutions, I'm sure, to the barriers to low, moderate income solar. Community solar projects and other sustainable energy and infrastructure projects. So we don't just do solar in our communities, we're working towards more energy efficiency and weatherization, but also big water infrastructure projects as well. This is like major expense for a lot of our communities. They lend themselves to really improving the quality of life in these low, moderate income communities. State and federal funding programs are critical to these projects and to helping to bring the benefits of renewable energy to low-income communities. And then technical assistance, I can't overstate this enough. Technical assistance, collaborations, partnerships, really coming together to help these communities understand what the opportunities are and how to implement those opportunities is as critical as the funding itself. So I think we're holding off questions until the end after everyone's spoken, but if anyone does have questions, I'd be happy to speak to those later. Here is my contact information if you want to know more about what we're doing at Rock, New Hampshire in this space. And if any of your questions are about specific projects, I'm going to give you a sneak preview as I open up the next slides of the information that I have ready. And I'm going to hand it over.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Jeannie. All right. Next up, we have Mark Bolinger from Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Bolinger. I'm the Director of Energy Projects and Programs, or I guess it's Programs and Projects at CPCNH, and I'm happy to have this opportunity to tell you a little bit about an annual solicitation program that we hope to launch in early 2025 to support the deployment of new renewable generators in New Hampshire. And, excuse me, and my purpose today is not just to tell you about this, but also to seek your feedback so that we can take what we learn from all of you and make this a better program. So first, just a little bit about CPCNH. We are a community-governed, nonprofit joint powers agency set up about 3 years ago to serve the growing number of community power aggregations that are springing up across the state. We currently have 68 municipal and county members that together represent about 40% of New Hampshire's population. At present, we are providing all requirements electricity service to roughly 175,000 accounts. And since we started doing that about 18 months ago, we have saved our customers more than $16 million. Looking ahead to 2025, we are expecting sales or load of about 1.5 terawatt hours, and we are continuing to grow. So here you see a snapshot of our membership. All of the communities that are listed here, well, the formatting got a little messed up, but all the communities listed in blue or red or shaded in blue on the map are currently operating, and by that I mean we are currently providing electricity service in those communities. And the way that works now is we go out into the wholesale power market and just buy the power and other products that we need, and then separately we go out and buy unbundled renewable energy certificates or RECs to provide the renewable content in those products. And with this new solicitation program, we're hoping to change that and diversify that procedure and improve upon it from an additionality perspective by contracting directly with renewable generators through long-term contracts for both energy and RECs. So let me tell you a little bit about this program. The idea here is that every year we will issue an RFP for a specific amount of capacity. We're currently thinking that 20 megawatts per year is where we'll start. And if all goes well, that would put us on track to have 100 megawatts under contract by the end of, or by 2030. So that's kind of our midterm goal. Respondents to the RFP could include a wide diversity of project types, including many different types of renewable resources, whether that's wind or solar or hydro or something else, different project sizes, and also different project structures. And within each of those combinations of resource type, size, and structure, we will publish price caps or ceiling prices above which we will not entertain proposals. So said another way, developers will need to meet or beat the published ceiling prices in order to participate in the solicitation. And our hope is that there will be many projects and many developers who can actually make that work, and that will result ideally in a little bit of friendly competition, which should encourage better pricing for our members. Competition is one of the three kind of key foundational pillars on which this program is built. The other two are standardization to reduce and ideally minimize transaction costs, not only for us, but also for our developer partners. And then also transparency in the sense that by publishing these ceiling prices, we will be sending transparent market signals to developers, but also to other stakeholders like policymakers as to the amount of value that these projects provide to us. So there's a little bit of an educational component here as well. In terms of project eligibility, as I mentioned, we're going to be pretty wide open here and consider any type of renewable resource for the most part. One thing you don't see on the list there is battery storage. We are not currently able to monetize the primary benefits of storage, but we're hoping to remedy that, and once we do, we will add batteries to the list. In terms of vintage, we are currently thinking that only new renewable resources will participate in this program. That said, we do certainly recognize the importance of maintaining our existing fleet and keeping those existing resources online and operating. And so we would certainly be happy to talk with existing resources to see if there are any promising opportunities, but we would prefer that that happen outside of this program. We will be setting a minimum project capacity just to try to keep our transaction costs down. We're currently thinking 100 kilowatts. That may be a little bit low, so we may goose that up, but that's where we are at present. There won't be any maximum project size, but there will be obviously the overall RFP cap, which again will be about 20 megawatts. And then up to 3 different structures, project structures, will be able to participate. The first that I've listed here is ISO New England generator, and by that I mean a project that has registered with the ISO as a generator, which means that it's participating in the wholesale energy and capacity markets. These generators are typically greater than 5 megawatts, and they're often much, much larger than that. In contrast, load reducers, which are the second category here, must be below 5 megawatts, and they do not register with the ISO. By injecting their generation into the local distribution system, load reducers reduce the quantity of wholesale power and other products that must be imported from the wholesale market. And then the final category is group net metering, which are also below 5 megawatts. These are essentially load reducers that are compensated through a regulated tariff, the net metering tariff. So we'll look at all 3 of these types of projects, and the type of support that we'll provide to each project depends in large part on how large the project is and also what type of project it is. So starting over on the right of this table, for registered generators and load reducers, we'll be offering them bundled power purchase agreements, which are your standard long-term PPAs typically at fixed prices for energy capacity and RECs. So this is a very standard contract in the industry. But for group net metering, it's a little different. We are not sort of a natural counterparty to a group net metering transaction. We're neither a natural host nor a natural group member. And so we've been struggling a little bit to find an appropriate role when it comes to group net metering, and where we've landed is that we think we can add the most value here by offering to purchase the RECs through a long-term contract, and the way we're thinking of doing that is through something known as a contract for differences, or a CFD. And essentially, in a nutshell, what a CFD would allow us to do would be to purchase the RECs at a floating price that varies inversely to movements in the net metering credit over time. And the idea is that if you combine that floating REC price with the variable net metering credit, you provide the developer with a fixed revenue stream rather than a variable revenue stream. And our hope is that that would sort of enhance the financeability of these solar projects. Before I leave this slide, I just want to point out the very bottom row for the projects, for the very small projects that are under 100 kilowatts. I just want to note that CPCNH has recently become a REC aggregator, so we can now aggregate RECs from small projects. So I threw this slide in here just to provide an example of what a REC CFD looks like within the context of a group net metering project. I'm not going to have time to actually run through this, but I thought it was maybe useful to include for reference. But I will just point out that the variable REC price on this graph is the orange line that you see on the bottom moving all around the place. And if you combine that with the green shaded area, which represents the share of the net metering credit that the developer retains, then you end up with that flat dashed line that's right at 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And that 10 cents would have been the price that the developer would have offered into the RFP. So again, this is really just a mechanism to convert a variable revenue stream to a fixed revenue stream. Okay, I mentioned ceiling prices and that they will determine what we're able to pay. those ceiling prices are going to be based on the projected value that the project provides to us over the full contract term. And that value is going to vary by resource to the extent that different types of renewable resources generate at different times of the day and during different seasons, producing different value. It may also vary by project size and structure, given that both of those things, size and structure, might dictate the kind of access or which elements of the value stack a project is able to access. So taking those things into account, we've done an initial assessment of the value that each type of resource and structure provides. And you can see the results here. We've got 3 different groupings: solar on the left, wind in the middle, and then on the right are what I would consider the non-weather dependent resources like biomass. Within each of those 3 groupings, we have our 3 project types, so load reducer, group net metering, and generator. And then each individual column shows the different elements of the value stack that these projects are able to capture and how much that's worth. So what you see in all 3 cases is that the load reducer produces the highest value, followed by group net metering, and then the registered generator. So what this would mean is that these should really be the prices that we're willing to pay for these resources, given that this is the amount of value that we think we can extract from them. And that is indeed the case for group net metering projects and generators, but unfortunately it's not the case for load reducers. We are not currently able to capture the full value of load reducers, which means that the ceiling prices that we're willing to pay or able to pay are just a fraction of the theoretical value of these projects. And that's really for 2 reasons. First, we're not able to monetize the transmission value of these load reducer projects because we don't have access to the transmission portion of the bill. The utilities control that portion. We can only access the supply portion of the bill. And then the second reason is due to something known as load settlement, which I definitely don't have time to explain today, but you can think of this as a sort of reconciliation mechanism that socializes the benefits of these load reducer resources across all ratepayers in proportion to the amount of load that each supplier operating in the region serves. And so for us, that's about 15% right now in at least 2 of the 3 utility service territories. So what I've done on this graph, this is the same graph that I just showed, but here I've added an additional column for showing a load reducer at the greatly reduced value when you take into account that we're only serving 15% of the load in these utility territories right now. So while we would very much like to be able to pay $108 per megawatt hour for a solar load reducer, in reality, we're only able to pay about $30 per megawatt hour at present. And that's a shame. The good news here, though, is that we are hoping to remedy this. We are actively working in the regulatory and legislative spheres to try and fix this. And once we're able to do that, not only will we be able to pay load reducers more in future solicitations, but also any current projects or ongoing contracts that have been contracted, for example, as a group net metering project, we will actively work with the sponsor to kind of restructure that project so that it can capture that additional value. And if we're able to do that, then we will very much be willing to share that upside with the developers. So stay tuned on that. And then my final slide, just wanted to give you a sense for what the typical time frame is throughout the course of a year. So we're hoping to launch in early 2025. We've front-loaded all of the administrative work to the winter months or the cold months, hopefully when people are generally less busy. So we'll issue the RFP in February, proposals due in March, announce the winners in April, issue contracts in May, and then once the contracts are issued and executed, developers will have up to 18 months to bring those projects online. And if 18 months sounds a little tight, it might be, but I do want to emphasize that this is an annual program, so it's going to happen every year, hopefully. And what that means, I think, is I hope that encourages developers to bring us only your fully baked projects and save your half-baked projects for future solicitations. And so then at the end of the year, we'll just kind of rinse and repeat and do this year after year. And with any luck, within a few years, we will hopefully hit our 100 megawatt goal by 2030 or perhaps even earlier. So thank you very much. My email address is here. If you have any feedback on the program, I would certainly love to hear it. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Next up, we have Tim Trefren, from CEO and founder of Recheck.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tim Trefren. I'm founder and CEO of Recheck. We are not a New Hampshire-specific company, but we are based out of Hanover, New Hampshire, and we're working on something that will be a nationwide initiative, but we're really here today to help spread the word and identify potential collaborators. So, the purpose of Recheck is to accelerate the rate at which we deploy residential solar. There are a number of barriers, as all of the people in this room know. The one that we are most focused on is helping build trust with consumers, to help build trust in a way that lets people get into homes and get more projects done. The core problem that we've identified is that people feel like they're going to get scammed. And there's been a ton of bad press. There's all this stuff about sales bros taking advantage of grandmas. And this is a really tough problem. It's one that's existed for many years. And we think that we've identified a pretty good solution. We are working with a broad array of national partners. This would be really, really hard if we were trying to go installer by installer across tens of thousands of installers in the country. What we are doing instead is going to a very concentrated part of the residential solar ecosystem, working with the national finance companies who have very vested interest in trying to solve this problem, both for their direct personal financial situation where if somebody feels like they got scammed, they may stop paying their bill. But they are also really affected by the overall state of the solar market. Their health as a business is a function of the health of the solar market. And so they're very incentivized to help us solve this problem. We spent the first roughly year of our existence just building this coalition. This is a very significant percentage of the national residential solar financing market. And so we went public. Oh, I should also mention SEIA. I'm sure many of you know SEIA, the National Solar Energy Industries Association. They were a kind of headline partner of this initiative. We did a big press release in June, and we're collaborating with them on the release of a set of solar standards for a bunch of things, but there's a particular one called the SEIA 401, which is all about the sales process and standards that the industry will be held to. Reception has been very positive so far. We've had most of the top lenders are signed up and are working on implementing this thing, which I'll talk more about what it actually is in just a moment. We've also had many large national installers down to individual groups that have come to us and said, hey, we agree that this is a big problem and we want to be on the forefront of solving it. We've talked with state associations, with Solar for All recipients, OEMs, distributors, and actually one of those finance partners on that last slide is now live with this, requiring any new sales rep signing up for their platform to be using Recheck. So here's what Recheck is. The original concept is extremely simple. We are making sure that people are who they say they are. There is a kind of surprising problem in the industry where it can be hard for outside parties to figure out who is actually involved in a sale. So if there's a report from a consumer saying, hey, this salesperson said XYZ, but that's not what I'm getting, that report goes to a finance company. The finance company doesn't have a direct relationship with the salesperson that sold the deal. They don't really know who it is. They may have their email address, and that's it. And we are working with them to basically make sure every sales rep has gone through an ID verification process, is issued a number, and that number is what is used to connect the dots all throughout the solar ecosystem. This ends up being kind of like a LinkedIn account. It is attached to the sales rep themselves, so if they switch jobs, they have the same Recheck account. They use it in different places, and it builds the framework for there to be transparency and accountability. When something bad does happen, it can be associated with the correct person and not just get stuck in a data silo where I can defraud someone and then go to a new company and continue acting that way. This is a high level of how this looks. I said it looks kind of like a LinkedIn profile. There's ones for businesses. There was ones for individuals. We don't really have much of a consumer-facing presence yet. This is not particularly aimed at homeowners. It's very internal to the industry. But the way this ends up getting used is by participants in the solar ecosystem wanting to determine which potential partners are trustworthy. And so they sign up to work with Recheck and help be able to monitor the reputations of these folks. One of the most common use cases for installers is when they work with third-party sales organizations. They want to be able to verify who these people are and understand their reputation. So we give them tools to do that. And we've gotten some really positive early feedback, people that are excited and hope that this will help solve problems around people breaking promises, lack of transparency, just generally people acting unethically. And again, we are now live. Any installer can go and sign up and start using Recheck. It's free for sales reps to create profiles. The folks paying for this are the finance companies. They have contracts with us to provide this service. And anyway, if you are an installer that is interested in being on the forefront of consumer protection and helping position yourself as someone that cares about this problem, I would love to talk to you. If you offer any kind of solar financing product and you want to make sure that you are partnering with reputable organizations and individuals, I think we're a good fit there. And other community groups, regulators, legislators, I think there's lots of opportunities to potentially collaborate. And so yeah, I mentioned all this is live. The way it works with the finance company is what they're rolling out first is requirements that to submit a deal, you have to link your Recheck account. So that's going to be our most important delivery mechanism for actually driving this to the entire industry quite quickly. We have commitments from them to bring on hundreds of thousands of sales reps onto the platform in the next 6 months. And so we think that this will catch on quite quickly, and we're excited to work with anybody who is interested in collaborating. Thank you very much. This is my contact information. I'll be around afterwards if there are questions. Thank you.
All right, I got it. All right, and last but not least, Lindsay Bourgoine from Revision Energy.
Awesome. Can you hear me okay? Okay. I'm gonna take the opportunity to sit. When you're not 5 feet tall, I'm not a big fan of podiums, so I'll be here. All right, my name is Lindsay Bourgoine. I serve as the Director of Policy and Government Affairs for Revision Energy. Many of you know a little bit about Revision, so I'll just share a little bit if I can. Oh, there we go. Okay. So our work, we are an 100% employee-owned certified B Corp clean energy construction company in northern New England. We operate here in New Hampshire, but also in Maine and Massachusetts, in the residential C&I and community solar space, as well as in storage, in EV charging infrastructure, and we also install heat pumps. So we kind of think of ourselves as really an aid in the clean energy transition. And to us, that's really important in terms of our mission, which is to build a just and equitable electric future. So not only are we partners in the clean energy transition, but also thinking about equity as we make that transition too. My role at Revision, as I mentioned, I work on legislative and regulatory issues. I do that in the legislature in Concord and also in regulatory forums. and that includes proactive and reactive work. And so today I'm going to discuss a little bit about the policy landscape here in New Hampshire, and kind of what some of those challenges, barriers, opportunities that we have here in the state to make a difference and kind of coming up on the horizon. And my hope is that it will bring together some of the themes that you've heard on this panel in terms of solar for all and serving low-income communities, in terms of community aggregation, and in terms of a rising really important trend in consumer protection. So I'm going to skip that one. This is not my PowerPoint presentation for this presentation. So I'm going to skip to a few slides. That's okay. Here we go. Okay. Yeah, find a good one. Okay. Here we go. We'll leave it here. That's okay, that's on me. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the key policies for solar. So first, incentives and compensation in the state. Obviously, when you build a power plant, the energy is sold, right? Usually the utility is buying that power and selling it to consumers. And we have to think a lot about that when we build distributed energy resources. How are we selling that power? I think a lot of people think about net metering as being a really complicated topic, but really it's just about how do we sell energy? What is the regulatory mechanism that we are using to basically compensate generators? And in this case, they're just located all around the grid. So in terms of what's happening in New Hampshire on this front, many of you are probably very familiar with a docket that's happening at the Public Utilities Commission. 22060 is the number, if for those of you that want to look it up. Maybe that's just me that's in there, but that's okay. And essentially, that docket has all but wrapped up. The briefing was actually complete just a few weeks ago in mid-October. And essentially, back in 2017, the Public Utilities Commission said, we want to revisit net metering. We want to look at setting potential new rates. We want to see what makes sense. And they said, but actually we don't have the information to do that. And what we really need is a comprehensive study of the value of distributed energy resources. What should we actually be providing for monetary compensation to net metering projects? And so they said, let's go about and do a study. And unfortunately, as a few folks have mentioned in this room today, that study took us about 5 years. It was completed by the Department of Energy with Dunsky Climate Advisors in 2022 and updated most recently in 2023. And so now it became time in this past year to go back to the PUC and say, okay, now we have this information. Let's think about what net metering in the future looks like. I'm not going to get heavily into that docket. There's generally speaking, there's a settlement that many parties are part of. There are a few parties that aren't part of that with some different concepts that folks are bringing to the table. But I think the point that I want to drive home today is we're waiting for an imminent decision. Unfortunately, the way that government works often is we don't know when that decision is coming, and I can't tell you that, but we are hoping that soon we'll have some answers about what the future of net metering looks like in the state. And that also is really important for Solar for All. Obviously, as Jeannie mentioned, all of our projects that we're building under Solar for All are subject to our net metering regime. So, our ability to make that policy robust and work for solar development in this state and our energy transition is critically important. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about siting and permitting. That is kind of the next barrier on my list. I shouldn't say barrier, but challenge, right? Or if we want to reframe that, an opportunity. And essentially, this is really about, in the past few years, we've seen a big rise in the industry in what are called soft costs of building clean energy, building solar, and that's kind of the non-material costs. So the costs for permitting, the fees that we pay. Also, oftentimes with permitting, we have to pay for significant engineering analyses. All of that adds up. Labor costs, as we all know, are on the rise. And so that's really challenging our ability to build clean energy in this state. And so these are things that we need to think about. We also need to think about how many permitting regimes we are going through and we are putting up. And an example I'll give from Maine, which is also where I work with Revision. In Maine, oftentimes on some of our commercial projects, there are 12 permits that we have to go through to build a project at the municipal, state, and sometimes federal level. And most recently, Maine passed some laws that will add a 13th permitting process and a 14th permitting process. And so I know sometimes it feels like developers are saying, woe is me, I have to do all these permits. And those are really important processes, and especially for community buy-in, but we have to think about the quantity and what we're placing in terms of the burden when we're really trying to transition to clean energy, because we know the impacts of climate change are here and continuing, and we really need to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. So that's just something to think about. The other thing I think a lot about in siting and permitting and where these conversations show up is in code. It was talked a little bit about buildings code and kind of some of the policy history that we've seen in New Hampshire recently in adopting building code. But one thing I get to think about a lot is fire code. And that's something about, where are we placing panels on the roofs? What do disconnect switches look like? How do we make sure that the systems we install are safe and that our emergency personnel understand how to work with them? And that really requires a lot of conversation. It requires relationship building. I've learned a lot in this space where an example, just to give you something tangible, is when we're building a solar system on a residential roof, there are specific regulations about the setbacks so that our emergency personnel could get on the roof to be able to serve that household in the case of an emergency. And depending on what those are, there can be a significant reduction in the total project size, right? So these are the things that we have to think about, again, in terms of siting and permitting of our clean energy. It was also talked a little bit about on a panel this morning, but here in New Hampshire, we go through permitting at the Department of Environmental Services, and there's some pretty significant conversations that are happening there around what are called the alteration of terrain rules and what we need to do in terms of stormwater management for our projects. And I will say that there have been many places in this country, New Hampshire is not alone in this, that aren't necessarily are essentially treating what's below a solar panel like a parking lot. I think that's the easiest way to think about it, and not necessarily thinking about it as a permeable surface. And so obviously if you put up a self-storage unit and you pave everything, you're gonna have stormwater management problems. That's gonna look really different with a solar array that doesn't have pavement underneath it. And so how are we creating permitting regimes and rules that fairly address those problems, and again, make sure that we can build projects and have them come online. Interconnection is the next bucket of things that I think about quite often, and this is a little bit of a long saga, so I'll try to go through it quickly over the last few years. But essentially, we are in a place right now here in New Hampshire where we are thinking about adopting comprehensive rules on interconnection across the industry, and that's really exciting. There was legislation passed in 2022 that asked the Department of Energy to look into setting uniform interconnection procedures. So these are the rules that govern how we interconnect distributed energy resources into the grid. And the Department of Energy spent about a year studying this issue, and they were asked to come back with potential statutory changes to put into place interconnection rules. And their report was really a summary of what they learned, and they recommended that we have working groups. So there were not statutory recommendations of changes. There was not a proposal to actually put these rules in place. So enter 2024, there was a new legislative bill that worked its way through Concord that said, no, we have to put these rules in place. We need to have uniform procedures. We can't have the world that we do right now where Liberty and Unitil and Eversource govern their projects differently. You can imagine what kind of landscape that leads to for those of us trying to build clean energy. We need to have comprehensive state rules. And so that legislation did pass. I know Representative Vose spoke about that this morning as being a success from this legislative session in terms of bipartisan work. And so now we have a rulemaking that has opened up at the Department of Energy that actually had its first working session or stakeholder session last Tuesday. Or actually that was this Tuesday. It's been a long week. So that's open, and what I will say is, personally, my perspective is I'm pretty hopeful. I think there's a lot of opportunity to better the rules here, to reduce those timelines that we're hearing about, so that we can build projects that will work for Mark's community aggregation, that will work for Solar for All and come online faster. But what I will say is, there's a long road ahead of us, and in the procedural schedule that the Department of Energy released, it proposed adopting rules, the final rules, in April 2026. So that is not tomorrow, and so we have some work to do to really try to advance that timeline, which I really do believe we can do. Okay, lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about workforce, and I think this is really about how do we build the workforce that we need to achieve the clean energy transition in this state. And I think there's been multiple conversations today about, especially in the legislative panel earlier, about how do we put forth a common vision and a comprehensive vision for what we want to accomplish in this state. I think that's incredibly important when it comes to workforce, because we need to build the programs to build the workforce that we need to achieve that vision. So this kind of, I was about to say this work in workforce, but you know what I mean? This planning should ultimately drive what we develop here in terms of our workforce. And so I think a couple stats that really help me understand the complexity, or not the complexity, but the need of this issue. In 2022, nationally, the average age of an electrician was 53. We have 10,000 electricians retiring every year and only 7,000 coming into the workforce. And also demand is growing. So that's leading to 80,000 openings a year. We believe at Revision Energy that electricians are the most important role in this clean energy transition, and we need many, many more of them to essentially save the world. So this is going to require really promotion of trades. Another area of policy this impacts is licensure, right? How are we licensing electricians? What does that process look like? And that includes things like that I get to spend time on about reciprocity with licensure for other states. So obviously Revision works in multiple states. So how are our folks that are coming up to speed in New Hampshire? Can they work in Maine? What does that look like? There's also, in Maine, the Department of Labor works a lot with Revision to support our in-house apprenticeship programs. And so there's also an opportunity here in New Hampshire for state agencies to really step up and support some of the work that's happening. I can, talk about that a little bit. So obviously, developing new apprenticeship programs, this is something that Revision has really put a lot of pride in the last few years of building in-house programs to train folks to be able to bring the workforce that we need online to bring the projects that we want. So we have multiple nationally licensed workforce programs, licensed apprenticeship programs, and we are launching a few more coming up in technical sales, another in managerial work. And so it's not just the electrician portion, but also, as you know, there are so many roles and responsibilities within the solar and the larger distributed energy resource workforce that we need to train people for. So that's pretty exciting work. Another thing that I would just say there that, actually I'll save that for my equity conversation, but the last piece I'll say here is that there was a legislation that passed in 2024, HB 1499, which actually was looking at building a conservation and clean energy kind of civilian conservation corps model. And so thinking about how could New Hampshire develop a service program to bring young people and folks looking for career changes into the clean energy workforce to build the future that we need. And so right now that was a study bill, so that will result in a study saying this is how we could set up a program in that state, or in this state, and I would say that's pretty exciting in my regard, or in our regard as well in terms of this work. Trying to remember which way, here we go. Just a few last things that I wanted to share with you of potential trends that we're seeing in the broader industry that could kind of come to fruition or impact the work we do in New Hampshire. In terms of technology, obviously we are seeing a considerable amount of solar paired with storage, right? When we look at the value of distributed energy resource study that came out in this state, it talks about the monetization of benefits of clean energy, and when we add storage to solar, we see those benefits only increase. So obviously this has been something that we're constantly thinking about. How do we build a stronger storage program here in the state? How do we compensate solar? I think these are things we're gonna see the legislature wrestle with in this coming session. We're also seeing a lot of focus on the residential side of whole home electrification. So, in the past it used to be let's install solar, and now it's solar plus heat pumps plus EV charging infrastructure, demand management, demand response. Really, we call this smart electricity management. How is the whole home kind of functioning on electricity, and how are we turning up or turning down resources as they're coming in, and appliances as they're using that load. And so just kind of some exciting things to think about in terms of policy and how we manage that. I know it's been brought up a little bit that there's some other states looking at distributed system operators, but how do we do a better job of looking at distribution and distribution management in the state? And then lastly, some equity and access trends. Obviously, as I mentioned, Revision's mission is really about building a clean energy transition that is going to be just and equitable, and that means really thinking about all people in this transition. And I'm really excited about the Solar for All grant. As Jeannie mentioned, the state got $43 million to invest across multiple programs, and that's obviously a considerable amount of money. In other states, a lot of folks are using that Solar for All money not only at kind of the larger scale community solar level, but also at the residential level through what's called the residential lease product. So instead of buying the solar panels for the owner owning them up front, they're actually leasing them, which obviously has significantly reduced upfront costs and is more is a better opportunity for low-income folks to be able to access that. So that's something that's popping up kind of around New England, and I think it'll be interesting to see how that impacts the market here in New Hampshire. There's also a lot of state programs. I think New Hampshire can and should be really proud of its low-income programs that it's had consistently over the years, and I think there's also a great opportunity now to think about how do we increase those fundings, or that funding, and how do we build more in that regard. And then the last piece that I just wanted to mention was pre-apprenticeship programs, and so I think there are a lot of folks thinking about, great, we have all these apprenticeship programs, but when you sign up, you're in, and it can be a long track, it can be a multi-year track, and sometimes that step into the apprenticeship program can be intimidating. And so how do we break down those barriers and invite potential non-traditional candidates into those roles? And so, for example, Revision in the coming year will be offering a specific pre-apprenticeship program for women who want to become electricians. And so I'm really excited about that opportunity opening up just more possibilities to build the workforce we need to achieve the future we need. I think I'm going to leave it there, but yeah, I'm going to do that. And apologies for sharing the wrong deck with Clean Energy New Hampshire. Appreciate you bearing with me there.
Thanks. All right, thanks everyone. So we only have a little bit of time left for questions, but I have a ton that I'm going to try and squeeze in. So Mark, first to you. I'm curious about sort of where is the demand coming from for clean energy? Is it like the renewable portfolio standard? Is it the community aggregations themselves might have a higher goal than the state RPS, or is it from consumers? Like, are there opt-in options within those community aggregations where people are asking for even higher levels?
Yeah, sure. So I would say the RPS, sets the base level, and then we build from there. We offer four different products. Our lowest level just replicates the RPS, and then we've got 3 opt-up products that gets you to 33%, 50%, or 100% renewable. And we have seen quite a few people opt up to those products. We have a few communities who have selected one of those higher content products as their default product. So I think there is a lot of consumer demand for renewable generation, particularly if it's priced well. And certainly the commercial and industrial market has also been taking off. There's a lot of like ESG-driven demand for renewable generation. We're not necessarily seeing a lot of that yet at the coalition, but it's certainly out there.
Cool. Yeah. And so the RECs that you've been buying to date and the ones that you're hoping to get, with this new program, are those specifically from New Hampshire or New England, or can they be from anywhere?
Yeah, so from New England only, and I think something like 68% of the RECs we purchased for the 2023 compliance year came from New Hampshire. So we're not buying national RECs. Everything we buy is from the local region.
That's great.
Yeah.
And so if the demand outpaces, if people are opting into those higher levels, you mentioned 100 megawatts by 2030 was your goal for this program. Do you have the capacity to scale that up if the demand is there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think 100 megawatts by 2030 would be, less than 10% of our load. So there's definitely room to grow that, and our load may be much larger by then as well with electrification and some of the other trends. So yeah, we definitely go higher than that.
Great. Tim, turning to you, I was curious, so you mentioned that the Recheck platform is for the salesperson specifically, and that sort of the audience for that is the financer. But I was curious about two things. First, it does actually seem like it would be useful to make it customer facing as well, so that you as a consumer could look up the guy that came to your door. But then also, tying it not just to the individual salesperson but also the company, because it seems like there might be cases where there's the salesperson is sort of representing the business model of a company, which might be the source of the sketchy practices. And so how are you thinking about that? Is that a next step to tie it back to the company too?
All of this is kind of being worked on at the same time. I think first point you made was this would be a useful thing for consumers to be able to see a homeowner, looking somebody up. Some of the earliest feedback we've gotten from groups that we're working with, including large players like Sunrun who are rolling this out now, is like, well, we want to use this in the home as a third-party generator of credibility. Like, look, we've had a problem of misrepresentation in this industry. This is me. Here's who I am. Here's who I work with. Here's any licenses or certifications that I have. There's a future where that might include consumer reviews, like at the individual level, where you say this guy was a jerk or whatever, right? So that's all in the ether right now. I think it's not the top priority. Our top priority is this rollout among the industry, which is very inwardly focused. But the sales reps themselves are a really important stakeholder here. We don't think it's most sales reps that are out there trying to ruin it for everyone. It's a very small minority. And so for the good reps who are in it for the right reasons, we do want to give them tools that help them sell more effectively and get more deals done.
Great. I'm also curious, so, right now, and I think it's very clever to tie it to the financiers and sort of get that big bite at the apple with a smaller group of companies that have a lot of control. But, Jeannie was mentioning that for some potential solar customers, there's a hesitancy to take on any new debt, right? So what if you are potentially not financing your solar and you've raised the money to just buy the panels outright? Is there a way to use the Recheck platform in that kind of transaction?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have the same centralized small group of players in a cash model. We do think that we will have most of the industry on Recheck, and there is already a mechanism for consumers to look somebody up. If somebody came to your door and said, hey, here's my Recheck ID, you could look them up. But certainly some of the feedback we've been hearing, and we heard that from your presentation too, is that lease models work really well in low-income contexts, and most of the large financiers that offer third-party like TPO-owned leased panels are participating in Recheck.
Right. Yeah, I am curious, Lindsay, I know you're personally not the boots on the ground selling these systems in homes, but has Revision been looking at this as well, or do you have an idea of what your perspective would be? Yeah.
Yeah, I think obviously we do residential sales, and consumer protection is extremely important. And as we are seeing a rise in the market and a rise in folks door knocking, I probably get a call from a friend a week about somebody came to my door and what did they say and what do they mean, and Lindsay, you're in solar, so you should be able to tell me. So I think it's really important, but I also think it's important just in terms of protecting good actors too, and making sure that kind of everyone is seen in the market based on how they're performing and how they're doing. So I think we really need these tools to be able to grow the market and to reach more customers. And I also think we're really excited about it from a mission standpoint, in the sense of it is critical that, within the Solar for All program from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, there is funding, as Jeannie mentioned, for technical assistance. And some states are really thinking about how do they use that to build up their own consumer protection programs and to partner with folks like Tim to make sure that we're not taking advantage of low-income customers. That's extremely important in the rollout of this program. And so I think the industry writ large is really excited about new possibilities and new tools to effectuate change.
That's great. Jeannie, a question for you. So the program that you mentioned is dealing with resident-owned communities, which are a whole bunch of residents, right, that are working together to put together this project. And then the project itself is very complicated with different financial instruments and all of these things. How have you found that process to go in terms of, reaching out to a new resident-owned community and explaining what's happening and getting everybody on board?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in my presentation, the technical assistance side of these projects is critically important as the financing side of the projects. And so in a typical rock community solar project development process, it starts with identifying a community that not only has suitable land for a project, which is the low-hanging fruit for us right now. As we go through Solar for All, we'll be looking at communities that don't have land and trying to find off-site land for those projects to benefit, communities that otherwise can't benefit from it. But one of the key pieces of due diligence is how well is this community operating right now? Is their board of directors really effective? Is the community attending their membership meetings regularly and participating in group governance? Because these projects are complicated and it takes a lot of information gathering, it takes a lot of compliance, and so that's a really important first step. So ROC New Hampshire helps with that process, and then partnering with the solar developer, the solar installer, with the energy clinic, with Clean Energy New Hampshire and their circuit riders to do presentations to the board of directors in the first instance at a resident-owned community to talk about what is community solar, what are the benefits, why might you consider it, why might you not consider it, making sure that they're informed in the first instance, and then scaling up to meet with the full membership and making sure that the full membership is informed so that this is a community decision at the end of the day. They don't feel like it's a new technology that's been imposed on them that they don't understand. It's really important that it's a collective decision-making process, and yes, it takes a lot of time and a lot of process, but it's worth it because in the end, each successful project seeds the next successful project, and that's what we're seeing when we get the word out that there's a rock community solar project that people in the community are benefiting from. We've had other rocks reach out to us and say, hey, we heard about this and we think we'd like to do that, and ultimately that's what leads to the success of the programs.
That's great. Okay, we're almost out of time, but I just want to see if there are any burning questions from the audience before we adjourn. Yeah, right here. There's a mic.
Thank you. Brett Gagnon with Pelham Community Power, Pelham Budget Committee, and previous selectman of Hudson. But on a personal note, I actually built and designed my whole solar array through a nonprofit group of community members who all kind of keep helping each other design it, buy the equipment under an LLC, and then help erect it all together. From your professional opinions, is this a competing business with someone like Revision Energy, or can they kind of play ball, and what spot of this big machine that we've been talking about today do you think they're best placed? And furthermore, if they are a benefit and not a competition, how could you sponsor them or kind of help those type of organizations grow for the greater good of all of this initiative?
Great question. Do you want to take that one, Lindsay?
Sure, I'm happy to comment on that, and I think I would keep it high level in an answer and just say, this was mentioned earlier, but when we look at total solar penetration in the New England states, right, New Hampshire is pretty far behind and something at 1%. And so from my perspective, we need all the clean energy that we can build here, and we need to welcome different structures and different models to build that. And so I think it's exciting that there's different opportunities. I don't have a good in-depth knowledge of what you are specifically building, but I think we need to embrace that as a state level, as a community of folks that are looking for local energy solutions, right? That's why we're all here today. So I think that the more opportunities to build distributed energy resources, the better.
Great. Any last question from anyone? Oh.
Yeah, it's not a burning question, but the questions for Revision Energy, I guess, or anyone else, are you all worried about running out of land for utility-scale solar farms? And you guys have done a great job on this, but as you mentioned, it just keeps getting dragged out. It goes on forever. And I mean, I own a bunch of land, and I have multiple options out there for utility scale solar farms, but just nothing ever happens. So it's not about me. It's a lot of guys like me. In the meantime, the only land that's suitable for utility scale solar, it's flat, dry land. In other words, land that's perfect for housing, and housing's booming, and the realtors are calling me. I'm sure they're calling everyone. I mean, it's not about me, but across New Hampshire, I mean, if this keeps getting dragged out, I mean, it's Eversource, it's Liberty. Those guys are horrible. I mean, at some point, I mean, guys like me aren't going to have the land available for utility scale solar farms. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that, please?
Sure, yeah, happy to speak to that. And I would also call in my colleague Mark, who was speaking on a panel earlier about this and land use. But I think what I would say is I'm not overly concerned in New Hampshire at the moment in terms of the opportunities that we have. I think, again, it goes back to that solar penetration being pretty low here and the opportunity, therefore, being big. I think in neighboring states like Massachusetts, there are real questions and real policy questions about how many greenfields are left, what opportunities do we have to build, and what is the technical potential of solar, and what opportunities do we have to really push that on the built environment. And obviously pushing solar onto rooftops, it can be a policy priority for states that are looking to really increase clean energy capacity, but also balance interests of local land use and local landowners. I think we haven't seen that saturation here in the state. I certainly think there are rising conversations about it, and definitely would be happy to follow up more about it. But I think that's my quick answer, if I heard the question correctly, if that answers. Yeah. Yeah, and Mark will raise his hand now in the back, and he's our sighting guy.
All right, well, we are out of time, but thank you, everyone, and let's give our panels one more hand.